Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What is the most insane, evil, funny, dumb way a spouse has tried to screw the other? Friend was going through divorce from insane husband. He had been texting her pics of the gun he bought and threatening her. Police were called. Nothing they could do because it was only a picture. He was staying with a secret girlfriend at this point. She allowed him to go get his stuff from the house. She was scared to go back in the house alone. I went with her. First red flag was he had changed the locks. So we waited for locksmith to open the house and change the locks again. Well, when the door opens we noticed all of the furniture was gone. So we carefully went upstairs in search of her cats. The entire second floor was empty. No cats, no furniture, even her clothes were gone. Come to find out he hired a moving company to pack and take everything, even the food in the fridge. Finally found the cats. He had taken them to another vet in town and put them up for boarding under his sister's name thinking she would not be able to find them. He was finally forced to disclose what happened to her possessions. He had them taken to a storage unit far away from the home. I worked at a computer repair store as a sales technician. Had a guy come in with a desktop that he wanted Windows reinstalled. I asked him if he wanted me to back up all of his data first and he told me that he had everything he wanted and just do the wipe. I put it in the queue and he paid and left. I started it about an hour later since an XP install was only about 45 minutes off the network. I didn't bother doing anything else except deleting the original partition and making a new one and installing Windows. About an hour after that his wife came running and asking if we had a computer with Smith as the last name. I told her I did and she showed me her ID and said that her husband brought it in to try and destroy all the proof of him cheating and stealing money from their business. When she asked if I had wiped everything yet I told her I just did a Windows install and didn't actually really wipe anything. I called her husband and told him the situation. I told him his wife was here to get the computer. He asked me if I reinstalled Windows like we spoke about and I told him I had. He told me I don't give a give her the computer. There isn't anything left on it anyway. I said alright and hung up. I told her that he said I could give it to her and then explained to her how reinstalling Windows doesn't magically delete everything and explained to her how I could recover all of her files in a couple of hours. I ended up staying late that night and she bought me pizza and Mountain Dew. I ended up recovering every file he tried to have me destroy and made multiple copies for her. She ended up calling him from the store and reading off some of the messages he had tried to delete from his emails. I was worried that he might try to come back in and confront me, but nothing else ever came of it. Not a lawyer. Just grew up with a shitty family situation. My mom was an evil mastermind with this divorce, let me tell you. So my parents had been separated but living in the same house for a while and it was around the time of year the family would normally go for a camping trip. Canada Day I believe. She convinced my dad that we would break the trip up and he would get a week. Then when he returned she would get a week with us, the 3 kids. Secretly during my dad's week she got her friends to help clear the entire house out. And I literally mean clear it out. There was nothing left. Not a single clothes hanger. No couches. TVs, quite literally nothing. She chose this vacation setup really well too. Camping meant we didn't need money or have access to cell service, which she took advantage of as well and emptied the bank accounts and hid all the money away. She didn't stop there though. She also maxed out lines of credit and all credit cards. Normally this would take a while but she was smart as hell in this approach. Earlier when planning this divorce she had convinced my dad to quit his job, quite high paying I should add, to start a company. This company was still new and needed a ton of expenses paid, so the banks didn't think twice about this ridiculous amount of money being transferred as it wasn't out of the norm anyways from their new setup with the company. Then, when it came time for my dad's trip to end, she told him he needed to call her when he got back in cell range. Upon calling, she told him that she was on the way out in the same direction anyways, so we could just meet halfway to spare us kids a bit of driving time on our way to the next trip. Which was odd considering after a week of camping we all wanted to shower and clean up, but she was very adamant. We met up and swapped vehicles, then my dad was on the way home alone, while we were off to hide away at a location different than where she had told my dad. When he got home he thought we had been robbed. It didn't sink in. He called the cops and started phoning family because of how empty the house was. He broke down and didn't know what to do. That's when my mom's dad came over and told him the truth. He said she left him and took everything. She hid us and I believe tried to steal us, but that part is a bit fuzzy for me. Eventually it somewhat caught up with my mom. The judge was shocked at what she did. She even went as far as trying to convince us kids that my dad was abusive and had us interrogated by a cop wanting us to lie about him. The whole situation was crazy. She ended up blowing all the money on fancy trips and shopping sprees with her friends. And when the judge ordered her to pay it back, she fled the country. Now she lives in Australia and doesn't have to pay anything. My dad was physically and verbally abusive to my mom and my siblings. He never sexually abused us, but he was serially unfaithful to my mom and had a nasty drug habit. He left rehab so many times. I don't know why she stuck with him that long. When I was in 7th grade, he tried to kill my mom, and she finally files for divorce, and none of his outrageous claims are believed. But I was a knucklehead like my dad. Nobody could tell me right from wrong. I was just following the example I had, and it wasn't good. Mom told me to straighten up or go live with dad, and like a fool, I chose poorly. It was a year of pure hell. His philosophy was the beatings will continue until morale improves, and he took it literally. He also remarried another drug addict right away. I suspect to make my mom jealous, but it backfired. During that year, he beat me, his wife, and even put my stepbrother's face through a glass coffee table when he tried to defend her from him. I decide I want to go back to live with mom, and it outraged my dad. He went off the rails for a bit. So he asks me one morning how I felt, and I told him to his face I wanted to live with mom because he was an abusive a-hole. Bad idea, as I got beat. But mom calls me that night and asks why we weren't at the courthouse. Turns out he skipped the court date and said he couldn't take off work because he wanted to keep custody to make my mom miserable. This happened 2 or 3 more times. Finally I wizened up, and the next time he asked me I told him I changed my mind and wanted to stay with him. So he says hop in the car. We get to the courthouse. My mom lived 2 hours away from his place because he moved right after he got engaged. So inside the courtroom the judge asks me which parent I want to live with, and I say my mom. He asked why I was changing my mind from a year ago, and I detailed all the abuse from the last year, including intentionally skipping court dates after asking me how I was going to answer. Judge glares at my dad and dismissed me from the courtroom, and I have to sit in the hallway on the bench alone. 10 minutes later my dad stomps out, grabs me by the arm and drags me to the car, saying the judge called me a liar and ruled in favor of my dad, but he lied and actually kidnapped me and beat my 2 hours back to his place. Oddly it wasn't ruled a kidnapping because the judge didn't sign the ruling yet, or else my mom never pressed charges on him. But he never went to jail. She came the next Friday night with a deputy to pick me up, his new wife. I refused to call her my stepmom. Caught me packing a few belongings and told him, and he left work to try to beat me again and stop me before she could get into town. But I climbed out my bedroom window onto the roof and told him I would jump off and run away to the police station if he tried to stop me. Just as he was yelling at me, the deputy arrived and my mom was pulling up behind him. So crisis averted. I was a different teenager after that. Not perfect, but more respectful. Ended up working at 15 to help pay bills while I finished high school. I hated my life as a teenager, but it made me into the man I am now. Joined the service a month after high school, and married 2 years later, promising I would break the chain of violence and abuse. We just celebrated 25 years in March, and I've never stricken my wife or cheated on her. By God's grace it will be that way the rest of my life. Not my story, but one I read here a couple of years ago. I really hope I don't butcher it as it's been a while, but here goes. There was a super wealthy guy that was a top exec at a Fortune 500 company who was getting a divorce, and it was rather nasty. This guy was pretty much set for life. He had a bunch of stock, houses, and assets in so many places. The ex-wife wanted everything she could possibly get. The husband came up with an idea that if she let him keep everything, he would give her half of his paycheck for the rest of his life. She quickly agreed because his checks were huge, and this also included any bonuses, which were in the millions. As soon as the paperwork was finalized, he quit his job and started to work part-time at a sporting goods store. I can't remember which one. This story was told by another employee. They're not the actual guy that got divorced. Anyway, he still had all of his assets, so he would drive to work in a super expensive car, and one day the employee asked how he could possibly afford that car. The guy said he was set for life and didn't even need to work at all, but every Friday when he got his paycheck it made everything so worth it, knowing his ex-wife would only be getting about $150 per check. Child of traumatic divorce here. There's so many, and I mean so many things I could post on this thread about how effing terrible my parents were to each other, but this takes the cake. My parents were separated, in the process of divorcing, and had split custody between my brother and I. We were 5 and 7 at the time. My dad didn't have his own place yet, so when it was his turn to be with us he came back to our house, the one he purchased mind you, and my mom was supposed to leave. One weekend they were arguing over something and it got so bad that my mom wouldn't leave and told my dad she would call the police, something she apparently did a lot to get her way, which after growing up with her I can attest she did this a lot unnecessarily to control us. So she left, called the police, told them my father was dangerous and had a gun. My dad was in the army and we had plenty guns, locked in a safe of course. Of course the police were just doing their job, and took my mom at face value. It went so fast from my brother and I watching TV with my dad to the police knocking at our door, my dad opening the door and getting pepper sprayed without the cops saying anything, and then my dad locked the door and the cops couldn't bust it down, so they came around back and broke our sliding glass door in so they could arrest my dad in our front yard with all our neighbors watching. I didn't really understand what was happening at the time, but it was traumatizing for sure. Then my mom tried to get full custody of us in their actual divorce, and thank God the judge ruled for split custody. My whole childhood was shy honestly. BC all they did was explain very deep and emotionally complex situations to very young children who just wanted their parents to love each other. But yeah, I've never quite forgiven my mom for that one.